You know, during the Cold War, we came terrifyingly, unbelievably close to total nuclear annihilation. Not just once, but over and over again. And the thing is, we weren't saved by some brilliant strategy or flawless technology. Nope. We were saved by sheer chance, by weird coincidences, and thank God, by the heroic hesitation of a few key people. This is the wild story of how pure luck, and believe it or not, a bear, kept the world from ending.
We really love to think of the Cold War as this super tense but, controlled chess match between two superpowers. We get this image of Kennedy and Khrushchev, these master strategists moving pieces on a global board with calculated precision. But that whole idea, well, it's a comforting lie. It's a story we tell ourselves to make the chaos feel safe. So the myth is all about deliberate, rational control. But the reality? The reality was so much messier. It was just a cascade of near misses, of system failures, of human error, where our survival, literally, came down to a coin flip. The real story here isn't about who was in control. It's about how we somehow managed to survive the complete and utter lack of it. To really get a feel for just how chaotic things were, we need to go back. Back to October 1962, the absolute peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And our story doesn't start in the White House or the Kremlin. No, it starts at a quiet, freezing airfield in Wisconsin, where the world almost ended without anyone in charge even having a clue.
Okay, so you have to understand, the tension was at an absolute breaking point. For the first time in American history, the Strategic Air Command was at DEFCON 2. This wasn't a drill, this was real. It meant every single soldier, pilot, and guard was on a hair trigger, fully expecting a Soviet attack to come raining down at any second. The apocalypse was just one wrong move away.
So try to imagine this. You're a young guard, you're on patrol at this critical military base up in Duluth, Minnesota. It's the middle of the night, you're exhausted, you're probably terrified, and you see a shape moving on the fence. In that environment, your brain doesn't think animal, it screams enemy. He saw exactly what he was trained and terrified to see, a Soviet saboteur. So he did exactly what his orders said to do, he opened fire and slammed the sabotage alarm.
And this is where a small, local event spirals into a potential global catastrophe. That alarm in Duluth? It was just supposed to trigger a local security response in a nearby base, Volkfield. But, and you can't make this stuff up, because of a simple wiring error, it didn't do that. Instead, it triggered the scramble klaxon. That's the one sound a pilot never wants to hear for real. It means take off now, because a nuclear attack is happening.
And what were these pilots scrambling into? Jets armed with something called the AIR-2 Genie. Now, this was not a conventional weapon. This was a rocket with a nuclear warhead on it. The whole plan was to fire these things into formations of Soviet bombers and detonate a 1.5 kiloton nuke, about the size of the bomb that hit Hiroshima, over North America, to stop an invasion. Yeah, over their own territory.
And here's the absolute kicker. There was no room for doubt in these pilots' minds. An order had just come down from the top. During the crisis, there would be 0 practice drills. None. So any alarm had to be treated as 100% real. As they were sprinting to their jets, they were completely certain that World War III had started and that their families were likely about to be vaporized. They were running on nothing but pure adrenaline and training.
Meanwhile, back in Duluth, they figured out the saboteur was just a black bear that had wandered onto the fence. But at Volkfield, the jets were already screaming down the runway, afterburners glowing. A frantic call came in, but there was no time for proper radio procedure. So, in a move that sounds like it's straight out of an action movie, an officer literally jumped into his car and floored it, driving right onto the runway and into the path of the lead jet. He forced it to slam on the brakes. A station wagon physically stopped the potential start of nuclear war.
But hold on, because just when you think you've got this wild story straight, it gets even more complicated. That incident, the literal nuclear bear, is one version of events. But there's another, equally terrifying story from the exact same crisis that also gets called the nuclear bear story. And this one takes place deep under the ocean.
So we have to ask ourselves, what really happened? The truth is, the entire system was so fragile, so close to the breaking point, that multiple disasters were about to happen all at once. The fact that these stories get confused with each other, well, that tells you everything you need to know about the absolute chaos of the time.
You see, NATO forces used animal code names for a lot of things, and the slang for a Soviet submarine was a bear. Well, during the Cuban blockade, the U.S. Navy trapped one of these bears, a Soviet sub called B-59, out in the Atlantic. And that bear was also about to start a war.
The crew on B-59 was totally cut off. They had no idea if war had already started. The air was running out, temperatures inside the sub were soaring, and the U.S. Navy starts dropping these small, non-lethal depth charges to try and force them to surface. The Soviet captain, completely isolated and believing he was under a real attack, ordered the launch of his nuclear-tipped torpedo. The political officer on board agreed with him. 2 yes votes. War was just 1 vote away. But the third officer, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He hesitated. He argued that they had no confirmation war had actually begun. That one man's refusal to go along, it saved all of us.
And when you put these 2 stories side by side, you see the twin dangers perfectly. The Volkfield incident was a hardware failure, just a bad wire. The B-59 incident was a human failure, a total misinterpretation under unimaginable stress. In one story, we were saved by a man acting decisively, flooring it in his car. In the other, we were saved by a man refusing to act. The main takeaway here is that the whole system was just primed to fail in a dozen different ways at once.
And look, the really scary part is that these moments during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they weren't some freak occurrence. The entire Cold War was just littered with these terrifying moments where the only thing standing between us and total extinction was a single person looking at a screen or a console and thinking, wait a minute, something's not right here.
Okay, let's fast forward to 1983. We're in a secret Soviet command bunker deep underground. Suddenly, an alarm starts blaring. The early warning satellite system, a system they believed was flawless, is screaming that there's an incoming attack from the United States. Not 1 missile, 5. The man on duty that night was an officer named Stanislav Petrov. Protocol was crystal clear. Report the attack up the chain of command. That report would trigger an immediate massive Soviet counterstrike. But he hesitated. As he said later, his basic human intuition just kicked in. A real first strike wouldn't be this tiny poke with just 5 missiles. No, it would be an all-out apocalypse with hundreds, thousands of them. The computer was screaming, attack, but his gut was screaming, mistake.
So he made a choice. He broke every rule in the book. He reported up the chain of command that the system was malfunctioning. He had 0 proof, just a gut feeling. And it turned out he was right. It was just sunlight reflecting off some high-altitude clouds in a weird way. His decision to violate protocol, all on his own, single-handedly prevented a nuclear exchange.
And the list just goes on and on. In 1983, a NATO war game called Able Archer was so realistic that the Soviets genuinely thought it was a cover for a real attack and almost launched their own. In 1979, an American technician at NORAD accidentally put a training tape of a full-scale Soviet attack into the live warning system. And get this, as late as 1995, Russian President Boris Yeltsin actually opened up his nuclear briefcase because their systems mistook a Norwegian weather rocket for an incoming American nuke. Every single time, we were just saved by some last-minute correction, some lucky break.
So what does all of this actually tell us? It tells us that this feeling of control we like to associate with the nuclear age, it's always been a dangerous illusion. The real threat so often wasn't the enemy on the other side. It was the incredible fragility of our own systems.
The real points of failure weren't really Soviet or American. They were just baked right into the system itself. It was about failures of perception, like a guard seeing a saboteur instead of a bear. It was about failures of hardware, like a single crossed wire. And it was about failures of procedure, with rules so rigid they basically outlawed the common sense that saved Stanislav Petrov. It all came from this one huge, flawed assumption that these incredibly complex systems and the terrified human beings inside them could ever be perfect.
So this is the most important takeaway. We did not survive the Cold War because we had some masterful strategy. We survived because of pure dumb luck. And we survived because a few key people, at a few terrifying moments, had the unbelievable courage to do the one thing the entire system was designed to eliminate. They hesitated. They chose doubt over certainty.
And that, right there, leaves us with a pretty chilling question for today. We were saved by the human element, by intuition, by doubt, by the guts to break the rules. So as we move toward a future with even faster systems, with AI-driven defenses and automated responses designed to take the human out of the loop, you have to ask yourself, who or what will be there to hesitate next time?